Right now, every single non-African person on the planet is descended from a group of people that walked out of Africa sometime around 50,000 to 60,000 years ago. Not a nation, not an army, not even a proper tribe. DNA evidence suggests the group that actually founded the entire non-African human population was somewhere between 1,000 and 50,000 people. Depending on which study you read, it might have been even smaller than that. A few thousand people who crossed a strip of water at the bottom of the Red Sea and never came back. But here's the thing that gets glossed over every time this story gets told. That wasn't the first attempt. Not even close. Humans had been trying to leave Africa for hundreds of thousands of years before that crossing worked. Earlier groups left, got as far as Laos, China, the Middle East, and then vanished completely, leaving no trace in any living person's DNA. Just bones in caves and the occasional stone tool. So the real question isn't just why ancient humans left Africa. It's why they kept trying, why they kept failing, and what was finally different about the group that made it stick. Before we get to Homo sapiens, that's us, we need to back up almost 2 million years. Because we weren't the first humans to leave Africa. Not even close. In the foothills of the Caucasus Mountains in the Republic of Georgia, there's a medieval hilltop town called Dmanisi. In the 1990s, archaeologists started digging there and found something completely unexpected: 5 ancient human skulls buried in sediment dated to around 1.8 million years ago. The oldest human remains ever found outside Africa. For a long time, the textbook version was simple. One species, Homo erectus, walked out of Africa 1.8 million years ago, made it to Georgia, and kept going from there into Asia and eventually Europe. End of story. Except the 5 Dmanisi skulls don't all look the same. They vary so dramatically in size and shape that a new study published in late 2025 concluded the variation is too extreme to come from one species alone, even accounting for differences between males and females. The current best interpretation is that 2 distinct early human species left Africa together at Dmanisi. One closer to Homo erectus, one more primitive, more ape-like, tentatively called Homo georgicus. 2 species, walking out of Africa together. 1.8 million years ago. That's not in most textbooks yet, but it's where the evidence is pointing. Okay, so ancient humans were leaving Africa almost 2 million years ago. And yet, every non-African person alive today descends from a single wave that crossed out of Africa roughly 50,000 to 60,000 years ago, which means everything before that wave. Gone. No descendants. No genetic legacy. Just fossils. And it's not like the earlier groups didn't go far. In a cave in Laos, scientists dated a pair of modern human bones, actual Homo sapiens, our species, to between 68,000 and 86,000 years ago, halfway across the world from Africa, before the main migration even happened. And yet those people left absolutely no trace in anyone's DNA alive today. They got there, they lived there, and then they disappeared. Earlier research found similar early sapiens bones in Sumatra, in the Middle East, in China, all of them predating the main migration, all of them genetically invisible in modern populations. So what happened to them? And why did the 50,000-year wave succeed when none of the earlier ones did? Here's the part that explains a lot. The climate of northern Africa and the Middle East was not constant. It fluctuated dramatically on roughly 20,000-year cycles driven by wobbles in Earth's axis. When the axis wobble pushed the monsoon rains north, the Sahara turned green. Grasslands spread across what is now empty desert. Rivers flowed. Lakes formed. Animals moved north. And humans followed the animals. The route out of Africa, through the Sahara, into the Levant, across the Arabian Peninsula, opened like a green corridor every time the climate shifted. A study combining climate simulations and archaeological data found that humans migrated out of Africa in waves, and every 20,000 years or so Earth's axis wobble caused shifts in climate and vegetation that opened green corridors between Africa and both the eastern Mediterranean and the Arabian Peninsula, enabling Homo sapiens to leave northeastern Africa and embark on their journey into Asia and Europe. But here's the catch. Those green corridors didn't stay open. The climate shifted back. The Sahara dried out again. The Arabian Peninsula returned to desert. The route closed. And the small groups who had crossed out were now stranded, separated from Africa, unable to get reinforcements, on their own in environments they weren't fully adapted to. Most of them didn't make it. And then, 74,000 years ago, something happened that came genuinely close to ending the story altogether. A supervolcano in Sumatra, Indonesia, now called Toba, erupted. This wasn't a regular volcano. It was one of the largest eruptions in the past 2.5 million years. It pumped so much ash and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere that temperatures in large parts of the northern hemisphere may have dropped by several degrees. Forests shrank. Grasslands dried. Food sources disappeared. For years, scientists called this the Toba catastrophe. The theory was that it reduced the entire human population on Earth to fewer than 10,000 people, a bottleneck so severe that it nearly deleted our species from existence. The genetic evidence for a massive population crash around this time is real. Our DNA shows a dramatic reduction in diversity right in this window, suggesting that some catastrophic event came close to finishing us off. More recent research has walked back the extinction-level event framing. Newer climate models show the effects weren't evenly distributed, and some areas of Africa appear to have been barely impacted. But the bottleneck in human genetic diversity is still there in the data, still unexplained, still pointing at something that almost broke us right around this time. Whether Toba caused it or not, our species was, at some point close to 70,000 years ago, reduced to a tiny, scattered population clinging on in patches of survivable habitat. The fact that you exist is partly because some of those people didn't give up. So here's the question that matters most. Why did the crossing that happened around 50,000 to 60,000 years ago succeed when everything before it had failed? The answer seems to be something that sounds almost too simple. The humans who crossed weren't just physically different from earlier attempts. They were behaviorally different, cognitively different, more flexible. A study published in Nature in 2025 looked at archaeological and environmental evidence from across Africa between 120,000 and 14,000 years ago, reconstructing what habitats humans were actually living in over time. And the finding was striking. Starting around 70,000 years ago, right before the successful crossing, humans began dramatically expanding the range of environments they could survive in. Before that, humans were mostly confined to familiar grassland and savanna environments. But around 70,000 years ago, they started moving into dense West African rainforests, into the harsh deserts of North Africa, into places with extreme seasonal temperature swings, environments that would have been basically uninhabitable for humans 100,000 years before. This wasn't just boldness. Something had changed in the toolkit. More sophisticated stone tools, better use of fire, evidence of planning and resource storage, possibly more complex language. The humans who crossed out of Africa around 50,000 years ago had spent tens of thousands of years learning to live in difficult, varied, unpredictable environments inside Africa. By the time they reached the crossing point, they weren't just tough, they were adaptable. And adaptability, it turns out, is the one quality that Africa's varied and brutal training ground produces in abundance. They were ready for the world because Africa had already thrown most of it at them. One more detail worth knowing. Where did they actually cross? For a long time, the Sinai Peninsula was the favored answer. It's the obvious land bridge between Africa and the Middle East, the one most people would draw on a map if you asked them how you'd get out of Africa on foot. But most scientists now lean toward a different crossing point. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a narrow strip of water at the southern end of the Red Sea, separating what is now Djibouti from the Arabian Peninsula. At certain points in history, when sea levels were lower than today, this crossing would have been only a few kilometers wide, possibly crossable on basic rafts, possibly even on foot during glacial periods when sea levels dropped enough. DNA evidence suggests the original exodus involved a small group, anywhere from 1,000 to 50,000 people, who crossed here and then followed a southern route eastward along the coast of the Indian Ocean, hugging the coastline, fishing, foraging, moving steadily east. Within a remarkably short time in evolutionary terms, their descendants had reached South Asia, Southeast Asia, and eventually Australia, which was settled around 50,000 years ago, making Australians among the longest continuously present populations outside Africa on Earth. From one narrow strait, one small group, all of that. And here's the part that I think is genuinely worth sitting with. The people who stayed in Africa, who didn't cross, who remained, they didn't lose anything. Africa today is home to the most genetically diverse human populations on Earth. Every non-African population is a genetic subset of African diversity, not the other way around. The humans who left were taking a small sample of Africa's genetic richness with them. The full version stayed, which means Africa wasn't the place humans escaped from. It was the place that built them. Over 200,000 years of evolution, climate stress, predators, drought, abundance, adaptation, and eventually produced a species flexible enough, clever enough, and stubborn enough to walk into the rest of the world and survive there too. The crossing at Bab el-Mandeb wasn't a great escape. It was a graduation. So why did ancient humans leave Africa? Because the climate opened corridors every 20,000 years, and people followed the food. Because earlier groups tried and failed, stranded by deserts that closed behind them. Because 74,000 years ago something nearly wiped us out entirely, and the survivors came back tougher. Because around 70,000 years ago, something clicked, a combination of better tools, more complex thinking, and tens of thousands of years of surviving every environment Africa could throw at them. That finally produced a group flexible enough to survive whatever the rest of the world had waiting. All of us who aren't from Africa are descended from that one small group. Somewhere between 1,000 and 50,000 people who crossed a few kilometers of water at the bottom of the Red Sea and just kept walking. And the wild thing is, they had no idea where they were going. No maps, no knowledge of what lay ahead. Just the coast, the food along it, and the same restless curiosity that apparently has been getting humans into trouble for 1.8 million years. What do you think drove them? Survival, curiosity, or just following the animals? Let me know in the comments.